Well, Colts fans, the dream you've had for at least 2 years now has finally been realized. Chuck Pagano, hashtag Chuck Strong. Well, you can Chuck Strong your rear on somewhere else as a defensive coordinator because Irsay's drugged up enough to finally have fired your ass. And I know Colts fans all over the place are like, because I mean it seriously. There was no more downbeaten fan base this year than the Colts. Like, sure, the Giants had a disastrous season, but they've had recent Super Bowl victories, so it's not that terrible. And the Browns, you know they're the Browns. You know they're going to be terrible. But there's also the potential, the possibility for getting the number 1 overall pick. That team ended up with 2 picks in the top 4 in the first round, so not all hope is lost. But for Colts fans, this was the epitome of a waste of time circle jerk season. You knew you weren't going anywhere. You had to know eventually that something was up with Andrew Luck, especially once that Jacoby Brissett trade happened. That really should have been the indicator that warning, 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 that maybe Captain Andrew Luck isn't in as fine of shape as you might have been led to believe. And what happened was a waste of time, lost season. At least you could say, for Colts fans, that Pagano gave you a nice parting gift in a terrible season that resulted in the 3rd overall pick in the 2018 draft. I'm just saying. So it's not all terrible. It's not all terrible. So what went right this year for the Indianapolis Colts? Well, in a big way, not a lot. I mean, you could say the Jacoby Brissett trade worked. You got rid of Philip Dorsett, who ultimately had flamed out. Brissett, at least if nothing else, established himself as somebody that you could count on as a backup going forward. You've acquired an inexpensive backup. You've given him almost a full season of starting experience. That's valuable going forward in this organization in 2018 and beyond, especially with the uncertainty surrounding Andrew Luck. You had Frank Gore go for over 14,000 yards in his career. What's he sitting now? 5th all time in the NFL in rushing yards. I mean, he's been a pro's pro for a long time, so it was nice to see him get to that milestone in a Colts uniform, I suppose. Jack Doyle had a big season as a tight end, which has to be a pleasant surprise for a team that had allowed in recent years their top 2 tight ends from before, and Coby Fleener and Dwayne Allen, to leave via free agency and trade. Now Jack Doyle steps in, and it's like you didn't skip a beat. You had 2 divisional victories. Yes, it was over Houston, but 2 divisional victories nonetheless. So you didn't win a lot, but at least you won 2 of the games in that crappy division. You got a top 3 pick out of this season, and again, if you're going to be bad, go for the gusto. Go as far as you can. Go the distance. And for the most part, the Colts went the distance, and you got a top 3 pick out of it. And you have to feel like maybe Chris Ballard knows what he's doing, so you have a pick that you could do some damage with, and you have a guy that could do some damage with said pick. And ultimately, Chuck Pagano is gone. After 6 seasons, about maybe 2 seasons too late, Chuck Pagano is finally gone. Believe me, I understand this feeling of counting down the time as a Bears fan to getting Jay Cutler out of town and then more recently getting John Fox the hell out of town, and you feel like everything is a exercise of futility until that moment comes. And then even when it does come, there's like a temporary yippee inside and that relief, and then it's ultimately like, God, a waste of time, and this still sucks, and it does. But it still went right. This season was so bad that the organization was left with no other choice. It wouldn't even have mattered if Pagano got leukemia again. He was still getting fired. Now he can get leukemia on his own dime or whatever. But what went wrong? Well, Chuck Pagano, starting Scott Tolzien to just everything that he did, the inexplicable reason he didn't play Quincy Wilson the vast majority of the season. The offense and the defense both sucked. Pagano doing Pagano things, celebrating a challenge that he won, but he really didn't win anything out of. That's Chuck Pagano's last couple of years in a nutshell. Bad game management, poor decision making, all of that. Just wrong. And then ultimately the big problem was the Andrew Luck injury. the shoulder injury that keeps him out some in 2016. You think with an offseason of rehab, he's going to start throwing in training camp and preseason, and then he'll be the starting quarterback at some point in time, and then that doesn't materialize, and then when he's going to come back, and then the Jacoby Brissett trade happens, and if you had any brain matter in your head at that point, you'd be like, ooh, this is not good. This could be an indication of a bigger problem. And then Andrew Luck still isn't playing. The decision is eventually made to bench him for the rest of the year, and now there's still talk about when's he going to be able to throw, how often is he going to be able to throw, how's his shoulder really feeling, and you're at a point in time where you really wonder if Andrew Luck is going to be your franchise quarterback going forward, and that's not a light matter. You've invested a ton of money in him as an organization with the hope of expectation of what he could bring, and you saw some of what he could bring to your organization early on in his career. And frankly, heading into 2018, you don't know if Andrew Luck's ever going to play another NFL game. And that's not an overreaction. That is not hyperbole. That's not any of that crap. The guy just missed an entire season and doesn't sound like he's any closer to playing at the end of 2017 than he was at the beginning of 2017. You've got to be concerned. Warning sounds and sirens and everything. Really, really concerned. That's the number one problem. The number one thing that went wrong for this team is Andrew Luck got hurt. Heading into this offseason, you're going to have a coaching search. Is it going to be Josh McDaniels? Is it going to be some other offensive-minded guy? Is it going to be a defensive-minded guy? I don't really know. I'm not going to try and predict at this point in time. It just needs to be the right guy, whoever it is. Now, with that said, this could still be an appealing situation for a head coach out there. Because let's face it, while you had two teams in the AFC South make the playoffs, it's not like they were gangbusters or blew the roof off of the joint. What, Jacksonville win 10 games? Tennessee won 9? Houston stunk. You could say, well, you look at this division long term. Well, who's to say they'll be a whole lot better? It's still an appealing option if Andrew Luck does come back healthy. You know, it becomes a much more appealing team, and you're talking about a team with $82 million in cap space. I've got some free agents I'll have to make decisions on. Frank Gore, Vinatieri, Muhort, Moncrief. You would assume that Vinatieri will be back if he wants to kick because you have no reason to get rid of him. The other three guys, I don't know. Maybe you'd bring back Frank Gore. Maybe it's time to move on from him. Looking ahead to free agency, I would anticipate Chris Ballard might try to spend a little bit. Maybe he'd go after somebody like a Don Poe, who you'd be familiar with, from his time in Kansas City. You need some help for Andrew Luck or whoever's going to be your quarterback, Brissett, or if you draft somebody or whatever the case might be, you need to get some help outside because T.Y. Hilton, Dante Moncrief was not getting the job done, and it's just that simple. So do you go after somebody on the lower end of the spectrum like a Marquise Lee? Do you go after somebody on the higher end of the spectrum like a Jarvis Landry, an Allen Robinson, a Sammy Watkins? Time will tell. But I would expect the team to invest something in free agency at that position because, frankly, they need to regardless of who the quarterback is going to be. So now you get to the interesting point with the draft. Once you get past the salary cap space that they have, and they have it in great abundance, so they can make some moves here and improve the team quickly or plug in some holes at least, it's going to be about the philosophy of the draft. Like, do you count on Andrew Luck? Are you confident enough to think Andrew Luck can come back and be the quarterback he was before? It's a risk, it's a gamble, and frankly, right now, none of us know the answer, and nor should we pretend to. We can have our opinions or our thoughts, but that doesn't matter at this point. What matters is Chris Ballard's going to have to ultimately make that decision and determine, do I have faith that Andrew Luck will be the starting quarterback for this team in 2018 and beyond? The answer, hopefully, for this organization will be yes, because it changes the entire approach to this draft. But if not, man, it opens up the possibilities for anything, and I mean anything, up to and including drafting a quarterback in round 1. But as you look at this team right now, they've got each of their picks in the 7 rounds. They're picking really high in each round. Obviously, they've got the 3rd pick in round number 1. So where do they go? What direction might they head? You know, this is a bad team, and they need help everywhere. So you really have to go with a best player available approach, but you still have to keep in mind that if you're not going to draft a quarterback, it is because you assume Andrew Luck will be a starter for you at some point in time in 2018. And if that is the case, then you must, and I emphasize again, you must get better help around him on the offensive side of the ball. When you look at the talent around him on the offensive side of the ball, it is frankly substandard and putrid. Thanks, Ryan Grigson. As a result, there needs to be a heavy investment made in the draft in improving the talent around him. Number one, they really badly need a 3-down difference-making running back. They're picking third, Saquon Barkley. Hello. Now, it doesn't mean that happens. Maybe you ramp up, and it sounds like Irsay's already talked about he wants a running back high. You could potentially coax the Browns or somebody else into trading up into your spot to draft Saquon Barkley so you can get additional picks. It's not the worst play in the world. But without a wide receiver really being worth a top 5 pick the way I see it at this point, it's either Saquon Barkley or who's it going to be? Quentin Nelson? Look, I think Quentin Nelson's a beast as a guard, and I think he might end up going top 5. But can you really feel confident drafting an offensive guard third overall? It depends. If you think he's going to be a Steve Hutchinson type of 7-8-time Pro Bowler at the position, then I think you can make a strong argument for taking a guard at third, especially knowing that you must protect Andrew Luck better. And Quentin Nelson is going to help you as an offense running the football and passing as well. Defensively, I feel like they need some explosiveness off of the edges in their linebacking core. Of course, we'll see whether this team is still going to run a 3-4 or 4-3. A lot of that has to be determined. They could definitely use some help in the secondary, especially at the corner position. But again, so much of this could be up for grabs depending on who is hired as a head coach, who's brought in for the defensive staff, and what type of philosophy and approach they're going to have. So that's where I kind of default back to the Colts have to sit there with the position that they're in and go with a best player available approach. However, that said, they can be open for business for trading down if they're confident that Luck is going to be back in 2018 at some point and accumulate some additional picks. With the marquee picks that they have in the first few rounds, they're going to be in a really good spot to trade back in each round. And if they play their cards right, they can end up with a lot of picks. Because let's face it, this team still has a lot of needs and they need a lot of picks.